All right, so now starting part 2 of nonverbal communication. Just as a reminder, we left off on the 10 channels of nonverbal communication, and those included our facial displays, oculesics, kinesics, gesticulation, haptics. I've lost my wording. Vocalics, olfactics, proxemics, chronemics, and artifacts. And pretty much all those icks. Facial displays is your identity. Oculesics, is your eye behavior. Gesticulation and kinesics is your movement and gestures. Haptics is touch. Vocalics is voice. Olfactics is smell. Proxemics is how we use distance and space to communicate. Chronemics is how we use time to communicate. And then artifacts, we finished off on that. We talked about what your rooms would look like as a teenager and how would you express yourself with the art you put on your walls. And I told you guys that I would probably put some teenage heartthrob on my walls when I was a kid. That was my go-to. I think I used the example of Jonathan Taylor Thomas. So let's get in now to culture, gender, and nonverbal communication. We will almost always come back to culture and gender in the communication conversation because communication doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are multiple different influences on communication, nonverbal included. And so this whole list here of culture influences, emblems, effects, personal distance, eye contact, facial displays, greeting behaviors, time orientation, haptics, and vocalics. Those are all the things that we just talked about. So I'm not going to go ahead and define them again. If you need help, go into the end of video 2 where I kind of go through what all these things are. But for example, I'll talk about how low contact cultures and high contact cultures differ in nonverbal communication. So if we talk about low contact cultures like Japan or Finland or Sweden, and we compare those to high contact cultures like Italy, Greece, and Mexico, think about our haptics. So high contact cultures, especially in Europe around Greece and Italy, when they greet you, so greeting behaviors and haptics here, when they greet you, they'll kiss you on each cheek. And that's just a way that's high contact. That's how they communicate. Whereas in low contact cultures, they'll generally greet you maybe with a handshake or a gesture or a bow, something at more of a distance or less intimate, you could say. That being said, some things are universal. Our book has studies that show that people express joy with laughter everywhere. And parents use baby talk for babies. This is something that I thought was kind of funny. If you think about it, no matter where you go in the world, it's just universally accepted to have a baby voice when talking to babies. So that is a little bit about the nonverbal communication. I'm going to go back just one little step here. I want to talk about emblems. Emblems are like we talked about. They symbolize things and they vary culture by culture. So we talked about low and high contact cultures and how it impacts greetings and haptics. But now if we talk about emblems, this doesn't have to do with contact. This has to just do with, remember, we give things meanings and we give emblems meanings and symbolization. And so when we gesture goodbye, we might wave, but that gesture could mean come here in other cultures. As well, as well, when we give the okay, we probably go with thumbs up. And crossed fingers when we're crossing our fingers for good luck. Those meanings or those hand gestures could have sexual or obscene meanings in other parts of the world. So always be mindful how we communicate, how it's perceived, because we might want to send one message, but be sending a very different message. Okay, so we're gonna go into our next slide, and we're gonna talk about how gender influences some of these exact, like I mentioned, some of these things that we described in our 10 channels of communication. So when we talk about gender influencing nonverbal communication, think about how maybe you talk to your sibling or maybe you talk to your partner and you notice that they're not giving you that same mirrored effect back, and you're wondering, well, why? Well, emotional expressiveness. Studies show that women are more expressive than men with respect of many different emotional states. This includes joy, affection, fear, shame. But men are more expressive than women with anger. There's some disagreement, though, that their expressions of anger are just shown differently. But let's think about that. Let's kind of break that down a little bit. When we see things, maybe in pop culture or in media, about how men are supposed to stay stoic, they're supposed to be the rock in the relationship, that really does put an impact on how they can express themselves, right? But women are often perceived as the emotional ones because studies show that we show emotion more vividly, I would say, like more intentionally. And so this emotional expressiveness differing from gender to gender, for some may be learned, but for some is genetic, right? Um, Boys don't cry. Girls can express emotion. Don't be a girl. You're being sissy. Think of all those statements that boys grow up with, and how it can impact emotional expressiveness. That's always just something that I take a minute for. But gender also influences the way we do other things. So eye contact. Women make more eye contact than men do when they are communicating with women. So women looking at women will make more eye contact. And that in our textbook, they did a study that said that women engage in more eye contact than men do, but it's a difference that has been demonstrated in both the United States and Japan. Female pairs used higher amounts of gaze than their male pairs when speaking, even if they were listening or during silence. They just made eye contact. However, research indicated that male-female pairs are similar to female-female pairs in terms of eye contact. Okay, so now we're talking about personal space. Women approached more closely and were more readily to be close to others and are more tolerant of violations of personal space. But on the flip side of that coin, in mixed gender interactions, men were also more likely to violate a woman's personal space than women were for men. So think about how you were raised, and maybe for the women in the class, if you were raised to always be mindful of other space, and maybe on the flip side, as a man, were you told to assert dominance? Now think about if you're in the older generations. I'm a millennial myself. And they talk about flirting or interacting with people at bars or clubs, or social settings in any way. And men were always told to be approached first, or men approach women first and be the one who initiates it. But oftentimes that leaves women in a more vulnerable position to have to sacrifice their personal space to a potential suitor or somebody who wants to slide into your DMs in a physical space. So think about that personal space and how it differs from men and women in communication situations, but men are more likely to violate women's spaces. You have to think about, again, this also goes, you ties into culture. If you are a high contact culture, and a male, you're more likely to think it's a normal behavior. But maybe if you're in a low contact culture and you're a male, do you do it less? Do you violate women's space less? So these are all intertwined. These all connect to each other. Um, and it's just really important. Again, I feel like I'm a broken record, but it's really important to think about when we communicate with other cultures, other genders, and being respectful. So for vocalics, touch and appearance, men's voices on average had a lower pitch than women's do. And then for touch, men were more likely to touch women than women were to touch men, unless the touch was a part of a greeting, like a handshake. But when when the interaction happened between same gender pairs, women touch each other more than men do. So women were more likely to interact with women with physical touch than men were to men. And then appearances. Women and men, clearly, if we see in pop cultural references, dress themselves differently or appear differently than the other gender. In Western cultures, using makeup was more common for women than for men. Although using cosmetics for men is increasing more. It's becoming more common. And then women and men often wear different style clothing, adopt different hairstyles, those things that kind of help them ID who they are to others. So really important. One of the most effective ways to bridge this gap of communication, now that we see the differences in culture and gender, is adapting to others' nonverbal behaviors. Understanding. I'm not saying adapt, oh, if a woman wears makeup, then a man has to wear makeup. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is understanding the reasoning for it, behind it. Remember, we talked about facial displays and identity. And so some people choose to identify to you using these things, these emotional expressiveness, these eye contact, personal space, vocalics, touch, appearance, artifacts. And by choosing to take the time to understand them and understand what they're trying to tell you without using words, it's important to any sort of interpersonal communication. So when we take time to remind ourselves that remind myself that much of a person's communication is conveyed nonverbally, pay attention to their eye contact, to their nonverbal actions, pay attention to their facial expressions, take note of their body gestures and their voice, the tone of their voice. These are all just simple, relatively simple ways to understand one another better. All right, so we kind of ran through the culture influences and I touched on how we improve our skills, right? So now we know the skills, we know the nonverbal cues, we know what to look for, and we have to interpret those nonverbal communication skills and be sensitive to them so we can be better communicators. So what are some other ways to be better communicators? Deciphering the meanings of these communications messages. So being aware of the situation. Context is important. So if you hear somebody talking loud, are they talking loud because they're excited? Or are they talking to somebody that's hard of hearing? Those can sound different. Pay attention to a group of nonverbal behaviors. So grouping those behaviors together, you can't seclude one behavior because, again, context is important. So is a person crying because they're sad? What do their facial expressions, their vocal tone, what do their body language tell you? If I'm crying with joy, I just won the lottery. Maybe some of that extra nonverbal looks like I'm jumping for joy. I'm crying, but I'm also laughing. I have a smile on my face, right? That probably tells you I'm pretty happy. I'm crying tears of joy. I said that winning the lottery, but you can also apply that to what? Getting engaged, or getting a good grade on the grade you needed to pass the last class of the semester. But if they're sad crying, maybe they're frowning, maybe it's more of a sob, their shoulders are down, they're not making eye contact. So groups of behaviors is important because you can't just pull out one behavior and say, well, that person's sad because crying. It doesn't work like that. And then, of course, cultural influence. Remember that cultures differ. Someone may not be flirting with you by kissing you on both cheeks. Maybe they're just Italian. Going on to continue some of these additional ways to decipher. Beware of what you expect to see. Remember our perceptions. We want to avoid fundamental attribution errors. To say that, oh, they did that because of internal and avoidable ways or avoidable things they could have done. They could have changed. However, if you do see something and you think maybe this is what it is, but you're not sure, it's okay to ask for clarification. When I teach in person, if I see students zoning out or maybe a blank face or maybe they look worried, like, you know, that face that dogs make, or that nonverbal movement that dogs make when they're confused or they hear something they thought they heard and they turn their head abruptly to one side. Yeah, I see some of that in my class. I'll ask students, hey, are we on the same page? And I'll look around. And those who are nodding their heads, okay, well, they're on the same page. They were just bored. But some students, maybe their eyes get a little wider, like, oh, she's giving me an opportunity to ask, or giving me that sad smile to say, like, I'm so sorry, but I'm confused. And I rely heavily on these nonverbal cues to say, okay, let's take a beat. Let's rewind it back. Let's try it again. And that's okay. Asking for clarification just means that you are a strong communicator and confident enough to acknowledge when you don't understand something and you're willing to learn. So never be afraid to ask for clarification in everything. And then remembering that interpreting nonverbal communication is challenging. Nonverbal cues are not meant to be easy. People think, oh, well, it's just communication. Like, this is an easy class. It's what we do every day. While the way we do things may seem easy, the way we interpret things is an active task. It's something that we have to put effort into to make sure that we're always growing as communicators. Communication is complex. We have to consistently be working at being better communicators. So now expressing, now that we've learned about how we interpret others' nonverbal cues, let's talk about how we express nonverbal messages. Work on your self-awareness. If you notice, maybe you jump to conclusions based on someone's nonverbal cues. I know a lot of you said that in some of our discussion boards. You made a snap judgment in our perception chapter. You made a snap judgment based on somebody's facial expression, maybe an RBF or maybe an eye roll. Work on your self-awareness. Catch yourself. Did I make a snap judgment before thinking about all the other influences for that person's nonverbal cues? Learn from others. If somebody is doing something that you think is positive or growth from where you are, learn from them. Practice being expressive. If you think that you're constantly saying, and again, a lot of people said this in these discussion boards, if a lot of you are saying, oh, well, sometimes people think that I'm shy or introverted or not interested because I don't make eye contact, I keep my head down, I don't make any brash facial expressions. Practice being expressive. Practice wearing your emotions on your face and doing it with intent. I know sometimes we all do it unintentionally. I've seen plenty of the bored faces in my class. I've also seen plenty of the excited faces. I've seen plenty of the faces that Allison makes a joke and they're cringing because they know that I want them to laugh, but they don't want to laugh. And now I've just leveled, I'm on the same level of coolness as their parents. But being expressive is so important because it helps others around you interpret you better and who you are better. Pay attention also to how others react to your behaviors. Not to say that it's solely your responsibility as a communicator to make sure that everything is smooth. And you shouldn't have to change who you are to fit into the mold of other people's interpretation of communication. But if some of the nonverbal things, cues, messages you are sending are consistently being flagged by others as concerning, maybe it's something that you think to yourself, is that the message I want to send? On the flip coin, maybe a lot of people really love when you tell or you laugh at their jokes and it makes them feel appreciated. Put that in your pocket as a note that that's how you express appreciation to people around you. That's what worked. And so when you go and you get into a conversation with somebody and you think to yourself, how can I make this person feel appreciated? And you think, oh, well, you know what? I knew that when I laughed at my friend's joke, she communicated with me, verbally or non-verbally, that she appreciated it. So let me try that. Pay attention. It just helps you be a better you. And now we're always going to tie, I'm mostly always going to tie some sort of visual or online digital aspect to it. Everything we communicate, everything we've been taught about communication for maybe the last, decades, right? Up until this decade, I would say, has always been interpersonal, in person, interpersonal, face-to-face kind of thing. But with the pandemic and the growth of technology and digital media, we now have to be mindful of managing our nonverbal behaviors electronically. Think back to COVID and how all of us, if not most of us, had to communicate at one point or another through Zoom or FaceTime or Teams or Skype, one of the many video conferencing softwares, because we couldn't be with each other in person. There's actual study, and they studied the way that we communicated non-verbally over video conferencing software, that said that we were more expressive, or we put more energy into it, which led to Zoom fatigue, which is how they coined it. There's an additional reading this week, and I truly think that this is something that you should read. It's a study done by Stanford, and it talks about the 4 causes of Zoom fatigue and how you can resolve some of those issues. It pretty much showed, like, so this part of the study showed that we were so, and I can be a prime example. I taught during COVID, and I wanted to make sure that students were just as energized as I was, but I was often, because of that, because I only had this little square box, I had to be way more expressive to bring people's attention out of their safe spaces, right? Out of their homes, out of their rooms, out of their offices, out of where they were in their comfort space, and tell them, hey, it's time to give me your attention. So go ahead, it is in the week 7 module. Read the 4 causes for Zoom fatigue and solutions from the Stanford study. It is something, honestly, I think you'll be really interested in, especially if some of you who are taking this online may continue to take online classes, but they may be synchronous, which means not face-to-face, but at a specific time where you're expected to sign on. And you kind of learn about how you're going to be communicating non-verbally in these video conferencing situations. But yeah, so that's it for nonverbal, guys. We crushed it in 2 weeks. This week we'll still have a new discussion. I will focus it more on the latter half of the chapters. So gender, culture, digital, interpreting, all sorts of nonverbal cue information. And then be mindful, we have a major assignment that's in the works. It is your media analysis discussion assignment. That is under the week 6 module. And I will make sure to include that in my class information video for you guys. But great job, and I look forward to hearing more about your interests in the nonverbal realm of communication.